Next up, we have a very special guest. Oh, I am just so beat. Okay, back to the show. All right, so we have a very special guest. This is none other than Tyler M. Realist. Please welcome to the stage, Tyler.
Hello. Wow. I'm really convinced there's gonna have to be. I thought umami was the last new flavor I would learn about, but there's a word for what that was.
Don't know what it is. But
I don't know what it is, and I don't think it's been invented yet. But that is okay. Well, anyway, I don't want to take up too much of your precious time with something that is not directly educational, that is not directly bettering your life, not preparing you for the real world. Because as I've stated, I am a realist. My name is Tyler. So let's dive into my presentation. It's going to be good. I just want to make sure that with my precious time that I've been given on this show that I am bettering your life in the best possible way. So thank you, first of all, to everything now and to Dr. Teacher for letting me come on here and speak about a subject that I'm incredibly passionate about. In fact, I would say I'm angry about. So yes, hello. Thank you kindly for giving me this time slot. You're probably wondering what I'm doing here on this food episode. What do I have to talk about? If you'll go to the next slide. I want to talk about kids' menus. I want to talk about them because they are one of the, many scourges of our society. Kids these days aren't prepared for how hard life hits them right out the gate. And kids' menus are something that come into the hands and go across the eyes of kids across this nation. And it's a contact point, a useful contact point for delivering information to children. And we're using it for things like, oh, hey, draw a funny hat, or, oh, hey, connect the dots, which are two scenarios kids are never going to have to confront unless they are in the extremely lucky position of being a hat designer or they have an emergency where they need to label a constellation. So we need to revamp kids' menus to prepare children for what is really going to happen to them in life, because life is actually pretty bleak. So if you'll continue to the next slide. Why do I feel so strongly about this? Well, because I'm living proof that kids need to be prepared rather than coddled, okay? I mean, things are happening out there in the real world that are not being addressed, okay? And I just don't want another kid to go through what I went through, stumbling through my life, not ready. So please move forward and I will... Today I stand before you nearly 8 years old, with my life mostly together. But back when I was younger and life hit me, I didn't have the tools to deal with things. And I'm not trying to have a sob story here. The things I've dealt with are things that probably many kids are dealing with that are just real. For instance, when I was a baby, my dad forced me to build my own cradle out of the raw materials around me. I, of course, ended up sleeping on an uneven pile of oval makeup removers with magazines as blankets for 2 years. Now, of course, after 2 years, I eventually figured out how to use a bandsaw, and I took my closet door and constructed it into a workable bed frame, but it took me 2 years to get there. If I had had some sort of preparation, some real-life skills, almost like schooling, trade schooling, perhaps I would have gotten there sooner. Another classic experience. When I was 2, my parents left me at home by accident when they went into the witness protection program, and I never saw them again. A classic thing that could happen to any kid, I'm sure. I'm not unique here. I mean, after that, I was adopted by the thieves that came to raid our empty house afterwards, and it was an adjustment. I mean, they exclusively referred to me as jewels and money because that's what they had actually hoped to find in my house. But I had to just deal with that. And again, a situation that no media, no children's media seemed ready to warn me about. Let's see. I don't know, just thinking about my life experience. Oh, another classic thing. When I was 3, my thief mom accidentally ran over my favorite stuffed animal in the driveway while she was on her way to sell it for money so she could get an inner elbow tattoo of a wolf. And to cover it up, she told me that Boris died of a rare and contagious blood infection. Naturally, I assumed I carried the blood infection as well and adapted to avoid human touch for the rest of my life. Now, if someone had warned me about such a thing, instead of wasting all of my kids' TV time with things like Dora and, I don't know, SpongeBob, maybe I would have figured out that Boris couldn't have carried a blood infection and I didn't need to grow up completely terrified of touching other people. But that's just one experience. I mean, there's plenty of other things that kids' menus could be teaching kids, like, if you'll go to the next slide, of course, speaking of pets, when I was 4, my thief dad made me take my goldfish out back and shoot him because the vet said it was very sick. That's a situation that I'm sure millions of kids across America are having to deal with this kind of pain. Of course, in my case, it was a little bit different because if you'll continue on, my dad eventually realized that, the vet had actually said that the goldfish wasn't sick, and it was actually the healthiest goldfish he had ever seen in 40 years of being a doctor.
Oh, my God.
And what he had really mixed it up with was that my dog was actually the one that was extremely sick. So, again, a classic situation. If I had just had some warning for how hard life was going to be, maybe I would have matured a little faster than 7 as I am now. I mean, I've got control of it. Just a couple more things that happened to me off the top of my head. Let me think. When I was 5, a grease fire broke out in my house, and they said the only way they could contain it was to actually move the fire to my room and let it burn out there. That was one. Oh, another thing. Let me think. There was, when I was 6, I had to get a job as a waiter to support my parents' dream of having no responsibilities at all. And on national TV, I became the first person to get fired at the end of an episode of Undercover Boss. You know, the part where they're giving people houses.
Oh, that was you?
That was me.
Oh.
You probably don't recognize me because I was 5 or 6 at the time, but now I'm much older. I'm nearly 8. But anyway, the summary of this is that anything can happen whenever. My story's, I'm sure, not unique. This is probably the kind of tale you've heard from a lot of 8-year-olds. But kids need to be ready and aware about these kind of things that could happen throughout life. And so, what I've done, the crux of my presentation here, is if you'll move on, I want to show you what I'm doing. This is a normal kids menu, okay? Looks familiar. Looks kind of froofy, you know? Kind of not full of substance. I've taken this kids menu and I've transformed it into a much more relevant model that will give kids something real to latch onto and something that will prepare them for life. If you'll reveal, this is my kids menu. Now, the first thing you'll probably notice is, if you'll go to the next slide, it's no longer a kids menu, it's a dependence menu. Because I think there's never too early of a time to become aware of where you stand in terms of finances and the burden you do or don't place on your parents. You never know when your thief parents are going to start making you do taxes. So these terms you're going to have to get familiar with before you're 8, like me. All right, continue on. This is the normal mascot that many kind of kids menus have, sort of a jovial chef. Maybe they have a funny animal. Not for me. I wanted to put someone on there who kids might actually have to interact with and deal with.
Holy
so I put
shit.
my angry landlord who has a breathing stoma, you know, one of those scary holes you get in your throat when you have surgery after throat cancer. And of course he's saying, you can have soup. Because kids need to realize that rather than having a menu of options, sometimes what they want is determined for them by the limits of their circumstance. So just get used to looking at that breathing stoma. You really get a close up with the mucus, and you just this is a real person that's gonna catch you off guard in real life unless you've been exposed to it already in menu form. I want you to see real people have real experiences, not just funny, happy chefs. A word search, of course. A classic menu tactic for distracting children. But this is pretty weightless, you know? So what I've done is I've revamped the word search to make it a little bit more realistic. This is 40 letters by 40 letters, and the only word in the word bank is friend. So, of course, this recreates the experience in real life of how extremely difficult it is to find a genuine and reliable friend in the world, sort of like finding a needle in the haystack. I mean, for me personally, it's been difficult. Most of the people I've considered friends in my life have turned out to be con men, or they were just being extremely sarcastic when they talked to me and I didn't realize it. So this is a little bit more of a accurate representation of what you're going to deal with throughout the rest of your life. All right, if we could, and there of course is the word friend if you were looking for it in the chat. I did make it diagonal because that is the most difficult thing I could have done. It's not even left to right or up and down, it is diagonal.
It's fucked up.
Yep. Of course, a word scramble, another classic entertainment mechanism for children. But what goal does this word scramble have that I found with a quick search of the internet for Happy New Year? No goal really, other than I guess to recognize words. But my word scramble, on the other hand, is a reverse word scramble, where you take these phrases and you scramble them so that you can see what it's like to have to read the directions of an EpiPen when you have dyslexia. A very common situation that I've experienced at least once when I went to my teacher after school and said, I've been having trouble reading. I think I might have dyslexia. And she said, oh, well, maybe perhaps the threat of a life hanging in the balance will fix that and you'll be able to read. So she downed an almond right in front of me and then started having a reaction. And if I had just known that that kind of thing could happen when you're 4, then maybe I would have been more prepared. And I did save her, but it took me a minute to read the instructions on the EpiPen. Now I'm an expert, but the kids of tomorrow should know before they go in to meet with their teacher about dyslexia, not as it's happening.
All right, that makes sense.
Oh, of course. A maze. We all love mazes. Everyone on the panel, we love mazes.
Of course, I love a maze.
Sure.
Right. But this maze is just teaching kids how to guide a horse back to the barn. Now, a few people will have this experience. I don't want to minimize the experience of people who own horses or barns, but it's a pretty low-stakes scenario, and you'll probably be able to figure it out. Mine is a bit more informative. The instructions here say, your friend was last seen at a McDonald's play place 2 days ago. Can you lead them home? This presents a bit more of a frightening scenario that is hard to cope with if you see it for the first time in real life. I, for instance, made a friend on Club Penguin. I decided to relax one time in my life and log on to Club Penguin. I made a friend, and about a week later, I hadn't seen them in a while, their penguin reappeared, and the little speech bubble said, hello, Tyler, this is not Alan, this is Alan's father. Alan is considered missing by the Broward County Police Department, and at this point we have no leads. Best of luck. And that's how I found out my friend was missing.
His father reached out to you over Club
Through
Penguin?
Club Penguin.
His father
Yes.
logged on to his Club Penguin account to tell you
Yeah,
that?
he was doing his due diligence, I believe, just making sure.
Right.
I guess Club Penguin was a pretty important place for his son. But if you look at the maze closely, you'll see the really final lesson of the maze. There is actually a box around the McDonald's play place, so there actually is no way to get from the McDonald's play place to home. And that's because, of course, if your friend or someone you know has been missing for 48 hours, the odds of them returning home are slim to none. And that's really the lesson I want kids to take away from this kids menu. I want them to be able to say that to their parents and understand that when they get home. So, yeah. Last but not least, here's a pretty silly looking exercise for a kid's menu. We got matching words to pictures. Pretty easy, pretty simple. Not a huge lesson here. So what's another version? Oh, this is much more helpful. Can you circle the mole on the sunbird shoulder that is probably or could be cancerous? This is extremely important for kids to be able to know. I, for one, was in a doctor's appointment where my doctor said he couldn't distinguish between which moles were cancerous and which might need to be biopsied or not. So he said, let's just biopsy every single freckle and mole on your body. At the time, I wasn't able to tell the difference, so I said go for it. When I woke up from that extremely harrowing series of biopsies, my doctor was there, and then another doctor walked into the room and said, who are you? And then the first doctor jumped out the window. So
it sounds like the first doctor might not have been a doctor.
it's clear that it's clear now to me that he was a fraud, but if I had only been able to distinguish between potentially cancerous moles on my own, I wouldn't have had to go through this experience at all. And that's what I want the kids of today to be able to do, is to not have to go and get 37 excessive biopsies.
You can also do something like this, but like try and distinguish between the real doctor and the fake doctor.
Yes, that's
you know?
another great thing that to add would be to put someone who looks to be a doctor and someone who actually is a doctor side by side and see if you can tell the difference between them. In my case, the guy who wasn't actually a doctor who did all those biopsies had shifty eyes. He smelled weird, and he was wearing all the normal stuff that a doctor would wear, except he was wearing shorts. So that should have been a key clue to me, but at the time I wasn't aware. So that'd be a great exercise to add. Now, that's pretty much it. That's the whole menu right there. Those are just a few ways we can prepare children for some classic scenarios that they're going to have to face, pulled from my experience. And I hope that this has been informative to you. And, you know, in 8 years, when I can finally drive with a permit, I'm going to try and spread these across the nation. And hopefully you guys can download. We'll post the menu, and you can download it, print it out, and make sure you bring it with you if you take your kids to an eating establishment. Does that sound like a plan to you guys? Can we change the world together? Can we stop coddling? Stop coddling. Stop coddling. Stop coddling. Thank you.
Stop coddling. Yes.
Thank you.
Stop coddling.
Great job, Mr. Brain.
Stop.
Thank you, Dr. Teacher. That was spirited. I'm really feeling excited about changing the